The 10th question of the Summa has to do with the eternity of God. And as I mentioned yesterday, eternity and immutability are very much linked together because something that does not change, like God as the only immutable being, will also be eternal because he's not subject to time. Because with us, the fact that we change inside of time, and if we had no changeableness about us, we also would not have to deal with time. So those two are very much connected one to the other. All right, so Article 1 is a very wordy article, and it says basically the definition of eternity. Okay, this is one that you might want to commit to memory sometime, whether this is a good definition of eternity: the simultaneously whole and perfect possession of interminable life. Okay, so that is the definition, according to St. Thomas Aquinas, of eternity. Now, remember, you got to look from the perspective of God and not from us, and try to get into the mind of God outside of time and outside of movement, and what exactly would that be like? It's very hard for us to even relate to that because all of our experience is within time, and therefore everything is always changing, as I mentioned yesterday with the quote from Heraclitus about you never step into the same river twice because it's always changing, right? So Thomas says, as we attain to the knowledge of simple things by way of compound things, so must we reach to the knowledge of eternity by means of time, which is nothing but the numbering of movements by before and after. For since succession occurs in every movement, one part comes after another. So just like we come to know the intelligible through the sensible, remember we learned that as one of the principles of our nature, we also can only begin to even grasp the idea of eternity by first of all thinking about time. And time is before and after. It's successive, right? And that's what Aquinas is getting at in this point. Okay, we reckon before and after in movement. It makes us apprehend time. Now, a thing that is bereft of movement, which is always the same, has no before or after, and that is only God. Okay, so then he goes on and says, because what is eternal is interminable, no beginning or end. Secondly, because eternity has no succession, being simultaneously whole. That is God, and God is eternal. And again, I think to some degree, we just have to kind of throw up our hands and say, our nature has a really hard time with this, so we're just going to do our best, okay, and not to put too much pressure on ourselves. All right, is God eternal? Okay, the idea of eternity follows immutability, as the idea of time follows movement. Hence, as God is supremely immutable, it is supremely belonging to him to be eternal. Okay, so that's very easy to understand. We learned yesterday that God is immutable. He doesn't change. Change and time are directly related to each other, so the only being that's going to be eternal would be the one that's also immutable, and that is God. Okay, on to Article 3, whether to be eternal belongs to God alone. All right, because eternity follows on immutability, as appears from the first article, but God alone is altogether immutable, as we have already explained. And then he says, unchangeableness, either in being or further still in operation, like the angels and the blessed who enjoy the world, because as regards that vision of the word, no changing thoughts exist in the saints. And so he's saying that to some degree, it seems like there is some eternity in creatures, like the blessed in heaven, or, where there is a beginning, but there's no end, and there's no changeableness really in heaven, but still these are not eternal beings. Okay, and the next couple of articles is going to explain this a little bit more thoroughly. All right, Article 4, whether eternity differs from time. The fact that eternity has neither beginning nor an end, whereas time has a beginning and an end. For eternity is the measure of a permanent being, while time is a measure of movement. Okay, the permanent being is God. Okay, God is being, being is existence, God is existence, remember? Okay, so we move on to article number 5, the difference of eternity and time. Now, this is really interesting because generally we think of either God being outside of time and us being inside of time, but Thomas talks about this kind of mid-range, category of time called eternity. And he says eternity differs from time and from eternity as the mean from them both. The difference is explained by some to consist in the fact that eternity has neither beginning nor end, eternity a beginning but no end, and time both beginning and end. All right, so within time, there's beginning and end, but, we are eternal in the sense that we're created in time, but then our soul does not die when our body dies, and so there's a certain kind of like going on with our soul, even though our soul and our body had a beginning, but in a sense it doesn't have an end. And so he's introduced this concept of eternity, which is really, really interesting. And then in the final article, he says whether there is only one eternity. And to that, he says that therefore the true reason why time is one is to be found in the oneness of the first movement, by which, since it is most simple, okay, see, we're talking about simplicity, the first attribute of God, all other movements are measured. Therefore, time is referred to that movement not only as a measure is to the thing measured, but also as accident is to subject, and thus received unity to it. So what do we gain from all this? All this talk about eternity is that we are inside of time, but we also have an eternal aspect to us because our souls will live on forever as long as God holds us in being, right? But then we also have to understand that God alone is totally eternal because he's immutable. And again, all these attributes of God fit together. The immutability had to do with perfection. The perfection had to do with goodness. The goodness had to do with simplicity. And so it highlights the fact that really when it all boils down, God is. Okay, so all these different attributes that we talk about God are related to each other because God is perfectly simple. And it's only in our mind that we have to create all these categories, all these descriptions, because it helps us to understand God, but God doesn't really need it because he is existence itself. All right, I hope that helps. Thanks for watching. God bless you, and tomorrow we will continue with the final attribute of God, which is his unity. God is one. So hopefully you'll join me for that. Thank you for watching.